Emily is a research psychologist. She studies cognitive biases for a living. She knows about variable reinforcement schedules. She teaches her students about the dopamine system. She literally wrote her PhD on attention and decision-making. She picks up her phone 96 times a day. Not because she lacks willpower, not because she's naive, because the system she's fighting was never designed to compete with her willpower. It was designed to root around it entirely. That's not a metaphor. That's the engineering brief. And she's not alone in this. James went cold turkey, deleted Instagram, moved to a dumb phone for 2 months, and told anyone who would listen that he was free. He was proud of himself. The clarity felt real. Then he came back. Because his industry was on LinkedIn. Because his friends coordinated on WhatsApp. Because the cost of being offline kept compounding in ways that being online never quite did. He came back, and within 3 weeks, he was picking up his phone 87 times a day. 2 people, 2 opposite choices, same result. That is not a coincidence. That is the architecture. And what you're about to hear is the science that was never explained to you. Not because it's too complex, but because explaining it would break the business model. Let's start with the one number they actually want you to see. Time spent. 40 minutes a day on Instagram, 2 hours on TikTok. It's the metric in the earnings reports, the number shared with advertisers. The thing they're comfortable measuring in public. Because as long as you're counting minutes, you're not counting what's actually being extracted. Below the time spent number are 5 more layers, each one more damaging than the last. And the final one is the mechanism nobody is naming. The first layer is the decision point. And the decision point has already been removed. Your brain has a stop button. It's the prefrontal cortex, specifically the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, the region responsible for inhibitory control, for task switching, for saying, this is enough. It is the most evolutionarily advanced structure in the human brain. 20 minutes of scrolling produces a 22% reduction in its power, not after years of heavy use, not as a long-term consequence. 20 minutes, the first 20 minutes. Every single session. There's a design framework behind this. It's called the Fogg behavior model, and it says behavior occurs when 3 things meet: motivation, ability, and a trigger. Most people assume platforms are trying to maximize your motivation. The smarter move, and the one that actually scaled, was different. Eliminate friction, maximize ability, make the action so effortless that 0 motivation is sufficient to trigger it. Autoplay, infinite scroll, biometric login, 1 tap, no loading screens, no confirmation dialogues. No, are you sure? By the time your prefrontal cortex could theoretically register a decision, it's already 22% weaker, and you're already on the next video. The decision point was not lost. It was engineered out. The second layer is the slot machine you didn't know you were playing. When Ozzer Raskin, the engineer who invented infinite scroll, finally went public about what he'd built, he said it wastes 200,000 human lifetimes every day. The man who built the mechanism said that. Here's why. Your brain has a system called the reward prediction error. The dopamine neurons in your ventral tegmental area don't fire for pleasure. They fire for the gap between what you expected and what you actually got. Certain reward produces a small dopamine response. Uncertain reward produces a massive surge. Every casino built on this principle. Pull to refresh is a slot machine. You pull the lever. The feed spins. Sometimes there's a message waiting. Sometimes a post that stops you cold. Sometimes nothing. The uncertainty is the entire mechanism. This is called a variable ratio reinforcement schedule. Behavioral psychologists have known since Skinner that it's the single most effective way to condition a behavior and make it resistant to extinction. The platforms know this because they read the same literature. The like button, the pull to refresh, the notification badge, none of this was accidental. It was the deliberate application of gambling psychology to a communication interface. The third layer is what happens to your brain state during engagement, and this is where the data gets uncomfortable. When you consume high-reward algorithmic content, alpha waves, the ones associated with calm, resting focus, drop sharply. Gamma wave activity increases by 62% during high-reward content engagement. On TikTok specifically, neural activity runs 40% higher than on other platforms because the rapid context switching between short clips keeps the brain locked in a state of continuous elevated arousal. That number is not about addiction in the clinical sense. It's about what that level of stimulation does to the brain's capacity afterward. And here's the piece they definitely did not want published. When you put the screen down, the arousal does not stop. Alpha recovery takes between 12 and 15 minutes. Your brain stays in a state of hyperexcitation for up to a quarter of an hour after the screen goes dark, which means checking your phone before bed doesn't bring stimulation to a wind-down routine. It prevents wind-down from being neurologically possible. That is not a character flaw. That is a product feature with a neurological consequence. The fourth layer is the investment trap, and this is the one that keeps people inside even after they understand everything else. After the slot machine produces a variable reward, the platform moves to what behavioral designers call the investment phase: a follow, a comment, a post, a profile you've cultivated over 5 years, a follower count built from zero, a DM history with people you actually care about. The endowment effect is one of the most robust findings in behavioral economics. Once something feels like yours, the psychological cost of losing it feels larger than the cost of staying. Loss aversion doesn't require conscious calculation. It runs beneath the level of deliberate thought. Your own data becomes the architecture of your captivity. You don't stay because the platform is good. You stay because leaving feels like giving something up that's already yours. The cage is made of things you built yourself. The fifth layer is the one that took researchers the longest to name and the one the platforms most actively suppressed. The algorithm is not passive. It is not simply serving content in response to your behavior. It is running a continuous psychological profile of your state. When you scroll fast, it registers disengagement and rotates content categories. When you slow on an emotionally charged image, it marks the category and increases its weight. When you return after a break, it opens with the highest engagement content it has held in reserve. It knows when you're vulnerable before you do. Frances Haugen, the Facebook whistleblower, released internal research confirming that engagement-based ranking systematically amplified misinformation, outrage, and amygdala-triggering content, not as a malfunction, but as the optimization working correctly. Threat response and social pain produce the highest interaction rates. High interaction rates produce the highest advertising revenue. The internal data showed that 1 in 3 teenage girls said Instagram made body image issues worse. 13.5% of teen girls in the UK reported more frequent suicidal thoughts after using the platform. The company saw those numbers. The engagement-based ranking continued, because distress is engagement. Engagement is revenue. She is not the customer. She is the inventory. Now here is the thing that took me longest to understand. And this is the layer nobody is talking about publicly. The real extraction is not happening on the screen. It's happening off it. Every time the algorithm creates what researchers call attention residue, the cognitive tail that follows task switching. It doesn't just cost you the minutes you spent on your phone. It degrades the quality of the next hour of whatever you were trying to do instead. Attention residue is what remains in working memory after switching away from an unfinished loop, a half-processed emotion, a thought that didn't close, a social comparison still cycling in the background. Researchers who study task switching find that users who check their phones between work sessions show measurably impaired performance on the work they return to, not because they lost the time, but because the brain never fully changed states. After hours of daily scrolling, prefrontal control drops by 35%, not just during the hour on TikTok, during the meeting afterward, the conversation after that, the decision made before bed. Time spent is the visible number. Cognitive degradation is the actual extraction. They are measuring the theft. They are not measuring what the theft costs. Here's how you know you're already inside the system. 3 signals. Be honest with yourself. First, you pick up your phone without deciding to. You become aware of this only after it's already in your hand. That is the hook loop completing before your prefrontal cortex was ever consulted. Trigger, action, variable reward, all of it beneath the threshold of deliberate choice. Second, you close an app and reopen it within 30 seconds, sometimes the same one. You know there's nothing new. You open it anyway. That is the reward prediction error running a second trial, the same reflex that sends a gambler back to a machine that just paid out nothing. Third, you scroll for 45 minutes and cannot name a single thing you saw. Not because you weren't paying attention, because the encoding never happened. Rapid context switching prevents the depth of processing required to form retrievable memories. An hour of content that leaves no trace. None of that means you're broken. It means you're working exactly as designed. Here's what actually works. Specific, not general, because general is how people do nothing. Step 1. Restore the decision point artificially. An app called OneSec forces a brief pause before any social platform opens. A breath, a few seconds of friction. That interruption alone shifts processing from the striatum, reactive, back to the prefrontal cortex, reflective. It reduced social media opens by 57% in controlled studies. The mechanism is not willpower, it's a manufactured delay. Step 2. Redesign the physical environment. Disabling notifications produces a 20% reduction in phone pickups. Not a mindset shift. Not a commitment. A setting change. If the phone is your alarm clock, it is the first object your hand reaches for before your brain is fully online. The morning battle is already over before it begins. Move the phone to another room at night. The environment is the decision architecture. Step 3. Grayscale mode. Color is a primary variable reward. Notification badges in red, the warmth of photos, the visual salience of icons. These are triggers calibrated for the primitive brain. Removing color makes the interface boring to the system that was designed to be hooked by it. One setting, no cost, measurable reduction in compulsive opening. Step 4. Batch your attention. The brain does not multitask. It switches rapidly and leaves residue each time. 2 specific windows for notifications and nothing outside of them. Between tasks, researchers recommend 30 seconds of deliberate nothing. Not meditation, just a pause long enough to let the brain close the previous file before it opens the next one. Step 5. Stop investing in the platforms you're trying to leave. The endowment effect makes leaving feel like loss. The antidote is reducing the asset. Stop posting. Stop building the follower count. Stop adding content. Every piece you add is another bar. Shrink the investment, and the psychological cost of departure shrinks with it. None of this requires extraordinary discipline. It requires understanding that your environment was built against you, and that you have the right to rebuild it. Emily still researches cognitive biases, still teaches her students about dopamine and the reward prediction error. But now she knows something she didn't have language for when she was finishing her PhD. The system she spent years studying had already spent years studying her. It knew her threat response patterns. It knew which content category would slow her scroll. It knew when she was disengaged and what it would take to pull her back. It knew all of this before she had ever named the mechanisms. That was never a failing. That is the asymmetry. You are a biological system that evolved over millions of years to navigate an environment of scarce rewards and real consequences. They built a computational network running on trillions of behavioral data points, optimized by the most advanced machine learning systems in human history, designed to find the precise stimulus that produces the precise response they need from you. The contest was never equal, but here is the part they actively suppressed. The defensive architecture exists. In 2026, a court finally named it in law, holding Google and Meta liable for $6 million in damages under a framework of negligent design, the same legal structure that eventually held tobacco companies accountable for what they knew and chose not to say. The science was not buried because it was complicated. It was buried because understanding it changes behavior. And behavior change is the one outcome that is genuinely bad for the business model. Your attention is not a personality trait. It is not a preference. It is the most finite biological asset you possess, and every hour of it carries compound value in the quality of your work, your relationships, your decisions, the texture of a life you actually chose. They have always understood this. Now, so do you.